Welcome back to Boring History Sleep. Today, we dive into a story from ancient Africa that will challenge everything you think about power, survival, and what it really meant to rule as a Nubian pharaoh. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because the history you're about to hear is as intense as it is fascinating. Imagine waking up to the blazing sun of the African morning, centuries before modern civilization, when the Nile flowed with life, carrying fertile soil along its banks and feeding a civilization that rivaled the great empires of its time. You are not just any ruler. You are a Nubian pharaoh, a descendant of the legendary Kushite kings who once crossed the desert and conquered Egypt, bringing a new dynasty to the banks of the Nile. Your skin, rich and dark as the earth itself, carries the heritage of generations of warriors, kings, and scholars, yet today, that heritage is not just an honor, it is a burden that will test the very limits of your mind, body, and spirit. You wear the crown of kings, its gold gleaming in the morning light, the urious serpent curling across your forehead, a symbol of your divine connection to the gods. Heavy jewelry presses against your neck and wrists, a reminder that power has a weight that is not just metaphorical. The air is already hot, thick with the scent of papyrus and the river, and your day begins not with leisure or reflection, but with duty, expectation, and danger. If you were somehow transported from the comfort of the 21st century into this world, you would not last a day. The palace, grand as it is, would seem more like a cage than a home. The walls are lined with advisors, generals, priests, and spies. Every glance you make is interpreted, every movement is noted, and every word spoken could either strengthen your power or signal your undoing. Assassination was not a distant rumor, but a very real threat, whispered about in the corridors, plotted in secret chambers. The people who surrounded you, the very ones sworn to serve you, could turn on you in an instant if they saw opportunity or weakness. Being a pharaoh was not about comfort or luxury. It was about constant vigilance, understanding that the crown you wear is not just a symbol, but a challenge, a living entity that demands sacrifice and attention. Every morning, you must remind yourself that you are the embodiment of divine authority. You are not merely a man, but a living God in the eyes of your people. That means your very presence must radiate power, confidence, and wisdom. Any sign of hesitation or fear could weaken your rule. You cannot falter. The eyes of the gods are imagined to be upon you at all times, and the eyes of your people, the priests, and the nobles are very real, always watching, always waiting for a reason to doubt you. The life of a Nubian pharaoh was one of unending scrutiny and relentless responsibility. Imagine stepping into a throne room where advisors and generals bow to you not only out of respect, but also out of calculated strategy. Every gesture is interpreted. If you nod too slowly, it is considered indecision. If your hand trembles during a ceremony, it is taken as a sign of weakness. You cannot even eat in peace without eyes following your every move, because even the simplest act can carry political meaning. In modern times, we can retreat into privacy, lock our doors, or spend a day without seeing anyone. For a Nubian pharaoh, that was impossible. Your life is always public, always a performance, always a test. Survival required mastering not just the art of war, but the art of perception. You would need to know who to trust and when to act, and even then, the outcome is never guaranteed. The palace itself is a labyrinth of intrigue. Hidden passages, secret chambers, and courtyards lined with statues of gods and ancestors remind you that you are never alone. Every noble has ambitions. Every priest interprets your actions as either divine or flawed. Your generals observe you not just as a commander, but as a competitor. In this world, knowledge is power, but action defines survival. The Nubian Pharaoh is both observer and participant in a game where the rules are ever shifting. It is not enough to command armies, administer laws, or maintain wealth. You must also navigate complex networks of influence, diplomacy, and superstition. Each day begins before sunrise with rituals to honor the gods, rituals that demand precision, memorization, and unwavering attention. The sun has barely risen when your first advisors appear, bringing news from the provinces, from generals stationed along the Nile, from merchants and foreign emissaries. They speak in whispers and measured tones, knowing that the pharaoh's temper can change the course of their lives. You must listen carefully, interpret correctly, and act decisively. Delay or indecision is dangerous. Mistakes are fatal. Even the air of the palace, perfumed with incense and cooled by flowing water, cannot mask the tension that hangs in every hall. Outside the palace, the Nile flows steadily, indifferent to human ambition, carrying ships of trade and vessels of war. The fertile land nourishes your people, but it also demands constant attention. Floods or droughts could spark famine, unrest, or rebellion. As pharaoh, you are expected to anticipate these threats, to act as both guardian and provider, ensuring the survival of your kingdom. And yet, these responsibilities are only part of the burden. The Nubian pharaoh is also expected to lead by example, to embody the strength, courage, and wisdom of a god. Your appearance, demeanor, and voice are all tools of power. A single misstep can erode the faith of your people, weaken the loyalty of your soldiers, and embolden your enemies. Leadership is inseparable from personal sacrifice. Every meal, every conversation, every moment of rest is measured against the standards of perfection that your office demands. Leisure is a luxury that exists only in theory. Even the arts and culture, which you patronize and celebrate, are not for enjoyment alone. They are symbols of your power, demonstrating that your reign is prosperous, sophisticated, and divinely sanctioned. Failure in these domains is not simply personal, it is political. Every mistake echoes through the corridors of power, reaching the ears of those who would seize an opportunity. And while you navigate the intricate webs of politics, the dangers of the outside world loom ever present. Raiding tribes, rebellious provinces, foreign powers, all watch your kingdom and calculate their moves. As pharaoh, you must be aware of every military threat, every alliance, every whisper of discontent. You must act with foresight, cunning, and absolute confidence. There is no margin for error, no room for hesitation. The life of a Nubian pharaoh is a relentless balancing act, where every decision carries consequences that can be immediate or delayed, personal or political, minor or catastrophic. Imagine being torn between appeasing the priests who interpret divine will, satisfying the generals who enforce your authority, and addressing the needs of your people who rely on your leadership for survival. Each choice has weight, and the wrong one can ignite chaos. The stakes are unimaginable for anyone not born into this world and trained for this role. And yet, there is a paradox at the heart of this power. You are godlike, revered, almost untouchable, yet you are more vulnerable than any ordinary person. Your life, though shielded by wealth, armies, and loyalty, is constantly under threat. The very crown that elevates you also paints a target on your back. The stronger you are, the more powerful you seem, the more others may envy or fear you. And plotting in silence is easier than open confrontation. You cannot afford to underestimate anyone, not a trusted minister, not a loyal general, not a foreign diplomat. In your world, appearances are reality, and reality is often deadly. This duality, the glory of divine authority and the peril of constant scrutiny, defines every moment of a Nubian pharaoh's life. Even before the sun rises high in the sky, you are already tired, already calculating, already acting. You are not simply a ruler, you are the axis on which your entire civilization pivots. Your people look to you for guidance, your army for leadership, your priests for divine interpretation. Every sunrise brings new challenges, new threats, new expectations. You are a god in their eyes, yet you are human in every way that matters, and that is why, if you were plucked from modern life and placed on the throne of ancient Nubia, you would not survive a day. Your comfort, your routines, your freedoms, all would be stripped away. The crown you might imagine as a symbol of luxury is, in truth, a weight heavier than gold, forged from the expectations, ambitions, and fears of an entire civilization. To be a Nubian pharaoh was to live in perpetual tension between mortal vulnerability and divine authority. You must embody strength while suppressing doubt, demonstrate wisdom while navigating deception, and inspire loyalty while anticipating betrayal. One wrong glance, one poorly chosen word, one moment of indecision, and your reign, your life, your legacy could end abruptly. And yet, despite the danger, despite the relentless demands, Nubian pharaohs ruled, conquered, and thrived. Their success was not luck, but the result of extraordinary skill, discipline, and endurance. They were warriors and strategists, diplomats and priests, humans elevated to a status that demanded perfection. This world is not for the faint of heart. If you think of ancient kings as pampered figures draped in gold, think again. Their lives were a crucible of fire, forging resilience, intellect, and courage in equal measure. And so, as you imagine yourself on the banks of the Nile, donning the crown of a Nubian pharaoh, remember that this life was not measured in days, but in moments of survival, judgment, and triumph. Every sunrise tested them, every sunset preserved their legacy, and every decision shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. You would not last a day, not because you lack intelligence or courage, but because the world they inhabited demanded a level of vigilance, sacrifice, and mastery that modern life can barely conceive. The palace walls, the rituals, the battles, the politics, all formed a reality so exacting that only the most extraordinary could endure, and that is the first truth of life as a Nubian pharaoh. Power is not freedom, it is responsibility. It is not luxury, it is trial. It is not glory alone, but glory tempered with danger, perfection demanded, and mortal endurance tested at every moment. To rule as a Nubian pharaoh was to live on the knife's edge, and to survive was itself an achievement worthy of legend. Survival in the world of a Nubian pharaoh was never a matter of comfort, luxury, or ceremony alone. It was a test of body, mind, and spirit, and one of the greatest demands placed upon a pharaoh was the expectation that he be a warrior as much as he was a ruler. Imagine the African sun beating down relentlessly, the heat rising from the golden sands and reflecting off the waters of the Nile. Before you can even think of sitting on your throne, before the advisors have whispered the news of distant provinces or the priests have begun their sacred rituals, you are expected to embody strength, endurance, and the kind of physical prowess that inspires awe in your soldiers and fear in your enemies. Unlike kings in some parts of the world who might delegate battle entirely to generals, Nubian pharaohs were expected to lead from the front. The 25th dynasty, often called the Nubian dynasty, was born from a culture that valued martial skill as much as wisdom. These kings had crossed deserts, waded through the complex politics of Egypt, and led armies into battle not as figureheads, but as generals whose very presence could turn the tide of war. Now imagine yourself in this role. You are mounted on a powerful horse or walking into the dust-choked battlefield, the heat pressing down on your skin like a tangible weight. You are clad in ceremonial armor, yes, but armor that must also allow movement, that must protect you from arrows, spears, and the ever-present threat of ambush. Your weapons are an extension of your will, the spear, the bow, the sword, each one requiring strength, precision, and practice honed over years of training. You are not allowed the indulgence of weakness, because the soldiers behind you are watching. Every move, every stance, every command must radiate authority and competence. Hesitation or error can shatter morale and invite disaster. The battlefield is chaos incarnate. Dust swirls in the air. The scent of sweat and blood mixes with the earthy smell of the Nile mud, and war cries echo across the plains. Your army relies on you to make split-second decisions: when to advance, when to retreat, when to flank, when to hold. You must read not only the terrain, but the intentions of your enemy, the fatigue of your soldiers, the morale of your troops. One miscalculation could mean death for you and hundreds under your command. And yet, the physical demand is only one part of this ordeal. You must endure the sun's heat without complaint, walk or ride for miles, carry weapons and shields that weigh heavily on your body, and remain alert even when exhaustion threatens to overwhelm your senses. Nights are no respite. Scouts return with intelligence that may demand immediate action. A river crossing that was assumed safe may have been sabotaged. A neighboring tribe may have shifted allegiances. As Pharaoh, your presence is required not just for command, but to inspire courage. Soldiers must see you as invincible, even when fatigue gnaws at your body and your muscles scream for rest. Your endurance is a living testament to your authority. Imagine the morning after a long night on the battlefield. Your body aches, bruises mark your skin, and yet there is no time for healing. The kingdom expects action. Letters must be written, decisions must be made, and the army must be mobilized for new threats. A Nubian pharaoh's life was a cycle of movement, strategy, and vigilance, punctuated only by brief, fleeting moments of rest, and the expectations did not stop at physical prowess or battlefield command. Nubian kings were also masters of strategy. You must know not only how to wield a weapon, but how to deploy armies, how to organize logistics, how to fortify cities, and how to interpret the intentions of rivals and allies alike. Knowledge of the terrain, the climate, and the habits of neighboring tribes was as crucial as the ability to swing a sword. You are not simply a warrior. You are a strategist whose decisions ripple across miles, across time, affecting the lives of thousands and the fate of kingdoms. Every move is calculated, but the unpredictability of war is always present. Ambushes, betrayal, disease, and famine are constants, and the pharaoh bears responsibility for mitigating these threats. Imagine having to cross the Nile with your army, ensuring that your soldiers remain hydrated, their morale intact, their weapons ready, while also watching the enemy who may be waiting downstream with a deadly trap. Every step carries risk, and every misstep can be fatal. Even training was relentless. A Nubian pharaoh was not born fully prepared. He was molded through rigorous physical regimens, battle simulations, hunting expeditions, and exercises in strategy. Hunting, for example, was not merely sport but preparation. Tracking animals across harsh terrain honed endurance, precision, and patience. Chasing lions or elephants was dangerous, yes, but it taught the king how to assess threats, how to react instinctively under pressure, and how to remain calm when confronted with life or death situations. These skills translated directly to the battlefield, where the pharaoh had to assess constantly shifting scenarios and act decisively. And even beyond personal skill, you must command loyalty. The soldiers you lead are not mere automatons. They are humans with their own fears, ambitions, and desires. You must inspire them to follow you into danger, to trust your judgment, and to fight with unwavering commitment. Authority alone is insufficient. You must demonstrate competence in every domain, from wielding a weapon to issuing commands, to showing courage in moments of peril. Failure to inspire respect and trust could result in mutiny or defeat. Now consider the psychological weight of this expectation. Each battle, each march, each campaign is a test not only of skill, but of endurance and resilience. The fear of failure is constant, yet showing fear is unacceptable. You must internalize anxiety, exhaustion, and pain while projecting an image of invincibility. To survive, you must be mentally as well as physically indomitable, and there is no room for error, because the consequences are immediate and often irreversible. A failed maneuver, a misinterpreted signal, a single lapse in judgment could cost hundreds of lives, destroy your reputation, and open the door for rivals to seize power. Beyond the battlefield, your role as a physical leader extends to the daily administration of your army. You must oversee training regimens, ensure supply lines are secure, and maintain discipline. Soldiers, like any large group, can become restless, rebellious, or mutinous if neglected. The pharaoh must balance severity and reward, fear and respect, to maintain cohesion and readiness. This is compounded by the harsh environmental conditions of Nubia and Egypt. The sun is relentless, sand and dust infiltrate clothing and skin, rivers flood unpredictably, and disease can spread rapidly. A pharaoh must be resilient in the face of nature itself. If the king falters, the army falters. If the king tires, the army tires. Imagine marching for days along the Nile, the sun high above, the ground burning your feet through thin sandals, your throat parched, your muscles screaming for rest. You cannot stop. The enemy is always present, even if only in your mind. A Nubian pharaoh must endure conditions that would break most ordinary men, because survival depends on strength, stamina, and relentless determination. And yet, the expectations do not end with personal endurance or battlefield skill. You are also required to participate in rituals that honor military victories and commemorate fallen soldiers. These ceremonies are physically demanding, often performed under harsh sun or in elaborate ceremonial garb. Your participation is symbolic. It demonstrates your strength, your commitment, and your divine favor. A pharaoh who fails to perform these rituals correctly risks not only political repercussions but also spiritual disgrace. And consider the unpredictability of war in this era. Ambushes, betrayal, shifting alliances, disease, and famine were constant. Even a meticulously planned campaign could be undone by unexpected variables: a river that floods earlier than expected, an enemy that moves faster than intelligence reports suggested, or the sudden desertion of key allies. In every scenario, the pharaoh must adapt instantly, demonstrating not just strength, but ingenuity, creativity, and decisive action. Each campaign is a test of leadership in its purest form, and failure is never excusable. Beyond the battlefield, you are also expected to project authority and power continuously. When inspecting troops, leading marches, or engaging in diplomacy, every gesture, every glance, every command matters. Your physical presence must communicate strength, resilience, and certainty. Soldiers, subjects, and rivals alike take cues from your posture, your tone, your energy. Weakness, hesitation, or fatigue can embolden enemies and sow doubt among allies. And even when not in battle, your life is physically demanding. Hunting expeditions, training exercises, ceremonial processions, and state visits all require stamina, endurance, and discipline. There is no escape. Rest is fleeting, and recovery is a luxury that few pharaohs can afford. Your body, like your mind, is in a constant state of exertion. All these demands, the physical strain of leadership, the expectation to lead in battle, the endurance required to maintain presence and authority, the mental calculation necessary for strategy and decision-making, converge into a life that is far removed from modern notions of ease or comfort. To be a Nubian pharaoh is to live in a state of perpetual readiness, a state in which failure is deadly, and survival is achieved only through constant effort, vigilance, and mastery of both body and mind. And yet, despite these overwhelming demands, Nubian pharaohs did thrive. Their endurance, courage, and skill in battle earned them victories, expanded their empires, and secured their legacies. They were not only rulers, but living embodiments of the martial and spiritual ideals of their civilization. Their lives were a testament to what humans can achieve when shaped by discipline, necessity, and the relentless demands of leadership. Imagine, then, being thrust into this world from a modern life of comfort. The expectations, the physical strain, the danger, the relentless pace, all would be overwhelming. The crown is heavy, the weapons heavier, and the life that seems glorious from a distance is actually an unending series of trials. Only those who are extraordinarily capable, disciplined, and resilient could endure such a reality. And that is the truth of life as a Nubian pharaoh. To survive, you must be a warrior, a strategist, and a master of endurance. Power is inseparable from effort, authority inseparable from skill, and glory inseparable from sacrifice. It is not enough to sit on the throne and issue commands. You must earn your place daily through strength, courage, and unyielding determination. The life of a Nubian pharaoh is one of relentless challenge, where every day tests the limits of human capability, and where the weak or unprepared are swiftly eliminated by the demands of circumstance, the pressure of expectation, and the relentless march of history. To live as a Nubian pharaoh was to embody perfection in action, endurance in hardship, and decisiveness in every decision. You would not last a day, not because you are incapable, but because the world they inhabited demanded superhuman qualities of vigilance, courage, and endurance at every moment of every day. And that is the second truth of life in the courts and battlefields of Nubia. Leadership is survival, and survival demands strength that surpasses ordinary human limits. The life of a Nubian pharaoh extended far beyond the physical demands of leadership or the battlefield. To truly grasp what it meant to rule, one must understand the immense cultural and religious pressures that shaped every moment of a king's life. As pharaoh, you were not merely a political leader. You were a divine intermediary, a living God in the eyes of your people. Your presence symbolized the connection between the mortal world and the realm of the gods, and every action, every gesture, every word carried significance that went far beyond mere politics. Imagine waking before the sun rises, not only to the physical demands of the day, but to the intricate rituals that have been etched into the traditions of your dynasty for generations. These ceremonies were not optional performances. They were obligations, sacred duties that linked the prosperity of your kingdom to your personal conduct. Your subjects, your priests, and even foreign observers scrutinized these rituals for signs of favor or disfavor from the divine. A Nubian pharaoh's morning often began with purification rituals. Before stepping into public view, you must bathe in sacred waters, anoint your body with oils infused with herbs, and wear specific garments that reflected both your status and your divine role. The selection of these garments, the precise manner in which they were donned, and the positioning of every jewel and ornament were dictated by centuries of tradition. Each element symbolized a particular divine aspect or connection. A misplaced headdress or an improperly positioned amulet could signal weakness, ignorance, or even divine disapproval. After preparation, you would participate in offerings and prayers at the temple. These ceremonies could last hours, demanding unwavering focus and precision. The recitation of prayers, the positioning of your hands, the presentation of gifts to the gods, all had to be flawless. A Nubian pharaoh could not afford error, because even minor mistakes could be interpreted by priests as signs that the king had fallen out of favor with the divine. And the stakes of these religious obligations were not abstract. They had real consequences. The pharaoh's perceived relationship with the gods affected the morale of the people, the loyalty of the army, and the stability of the state. If the rituals suggested divine anger, crops could fail, armies could falter, and rebellions could ignite. Success on the throne was intertwined with divine approval, and divine approval was signaled through adherence to ritual, tradition, and symbolism. Your role as a religious figure was also political. The priests of Nubia were powerful, educated, and influential. They interpreted the will of the gods and acted as mediators between the spiritual and temporal realms. Aligning with their guidance was crucial. Displeasing a priest or ignoring a sacred tradition could result in loss of support, public dissent, or even conspiracy against your rule. You were constantly navigating a delicate balance, demonstrating your power and independence as king while honoring the religious authority that legitimized that power. Consider the complexity of ceremonial duties beyond the temple. Festivals, seasonal observances, and commemorations of past victories or deities demanded active participation. You were expected to appear in public, lead processions, make offerings, and speak words imbued with religious significance. Every movement was symbolic, every action a statement of authority, piety, and divine favor. These duties were exhausting, both mentally and physically, yet failure was never tolerated. Even simple gestures could carry profound meaning. For instance, raising a scepter in the wrong way, bowing incorrectly, or mispronouncing a sacred phrase could undermine your authority in the eyes of both gods and people. Beyond ceremonial duties, your role demanded mastery of religious knowledge. The pharaoh was expected to understand myths, histories, prophecies, and sacred texts. You needed to counsel priests, debate interpretations, and make judgments based on both spiritual and practical considerations. A Nubian pharaoh who ignored or misunderstood religious guidance risked public perception as incompetent or impious. Your connection to the divine extended to everyday governance. Before issuing decrees, you might consult oracles or interpret omens. Even minor administrative decisions, allocating resources, responding to disputes, or negotiating treaties, were performed under the scrutiny of religious doctrine. Acting contrary to divine guidance was not just politically dangerous, it was a spiritual transgression with the potential to destabilize the kingdom. The pharaoh was a living embodiment of cosmic order, and every failure in judgment could ripple across society, creating unrest, famine, or civil strife. The pressure of embodying divinity was relentless. Even in private, the pharaoh could not escape scrutiny. Courtiers, advisors, and the royal family observed conduct closely, measuring whether behavior matched the divine image expected of a ruler. Meals, rest, conversation, every moment was a performance of piety and propriety. Personal desires and human weaknesses were suppressed, hidden beneath layers of ritual, etiquette, and expectation. Any lapse could be interpreted as moral failure or divine disfavor. And then there were the spiritual tests of leadership. War, famine, disease, and rebellion were not only political challenges, but also signs scrutinized for divine significance. As pharaoh, you had to interpret misfortune and act decisively to restore balance, even if the causes were beyond human understanding. Every decision was weighed against a spiritual framework. Was it just, righteous, and aligned with divine will? The psychological burden of this expectation was immense. A Nubian pharaoh was expected to embody perfection in every action while navigating the uncertainties of both the physical and spiritual worlds. Mistakes were not merely personal failures. They were cosmic disturbances, opportunities for rivals, and potential threats to the stability of the entire kingdom. Beyond ritual, religion shaped architecture, art, and daily life. The pharaoh's palace, temples, and monuments were carefully designed to reflect cosmic principles, honor the gods, and demonstrate authority. You were expected to oversee the construction of these structures, ensure their alignment with sacred guidelines, and participate in the rituals that sanctified them. Every stone placed, every hieroglyph carved, every statue erected was a testament to your piety, your wisdom, and your right to rule. The pharaoh's knowledge of culture was also crucial in diplomacy. When interacting with foreign emissaries, neighboring kings, or trade partners, you needed to convey sophistication, divine favor, and legitimacy. Ceremonial display was a form of communication, signaling power, respect, and religious alignment. A misstep in protocol could be perceived as weakness, opening the door for exploitation or aggression. And then there was the human aspect of these expectations. Even while performing rituals or participating in public ceremonies, the pharaoh was expected to maintain charisma, inspire confidence, and project strength. Your soldiers, your people, and even your family were watching. Every action reinforced your authority or weakened it. You could not afford fatigue, distraction, or error. Physical, mental, and spiritual endurance were inseparable. The demands extended to education as well. A Nubian pharaoh had to be literate in sacred texts, knowledgeable about law, history, and science, and skilled in negotiation and diplomacy. You were a repository of knowledge, a living library of culture and tradition. Ignorance was not forgiven. A ruler who could not recall sacred stories, interpret omens, or advise priests accurately would be seen as unworthy, undermining both divine and temporal authority. Consider the long-term weight of tradition. These customs were centuries old, passed down from ancestors who conquered, ruled, and survived through extraordinary skill. To ignore them was to erase the legacy of your predecessors, to sever the link between past, present, and divine expectation. Every pharaoh lived under this enormous historical weight, and the expectations of your people were amplified by the knowledge that their ancestors had endured similar trials. Furthermore, the pharaoh's life was filled with paradox. You were simultaneously revered as divine and scrutinized as mortal. You held ultimate authority yet were constrained by ritual, religion, and tradition. You could command armies, levy taxes, and negotiate treaties, yet a single error in ceremony or interpretation could diminish your power overnight. To navigate these contradictions required not only intelligence, but resilience, focus, and adaptability. Cultural weight of your role extended to art, music, and literature. You were the patron of artists and scribes, responsible for ensuring that every representation of your reign reflected both glory and divinity. A painting that misrepresented your actions, a poem that offended religious sensibilities, a song that mocked the gods, all could be interpreted as political and spiritual failure. Even the choice of colors, materials, and symbols carried meaning, linking your reign to cosmic order and divine favor. And while the pharaoh was immersed in ritual and culture, life outside the palace demanded constant attention. Neighboring kingdoms, hostile tribes, and trading partners all observed the strength and behavior of the Nubian pharaoh. A misinterpreted ritual or a perceived lack of divine favor could embolden adversaries, spark rebellion, or undermine diplomatic efforts. Maintaining an image of perfection was essential not only within your kingdom but across the region. The constant scrutiny, the weight of tradition, the expectations of priests, generals, and subjects created a life in which failure was always a threat, and success was never guaranteed. Each day demanded flawless execution of ritual, governance, military readiness, and cultural stewardship. The pharaoh could not retreat from these duties, for to do so was to invite disorder, disrespect, and chaos. And yet, despite the overwhelming pressure, Nubian pharaohs did flourish. Their ability to navigate these demands, ritual, culture, religion, and politics, allowed them to expand empires, forge alliances, and leave enduring legacies. Their lives demonstrate an extraordinary combination of spiritual awareness, intellectual capacity, and practical wisdom. Being a Nubian pharaoh required a total commitment of mind, body, and spirit. It was not a role that allowed error or indulgence. Every day was a test of endurance, knowledge, and composure. Even when seated on the throne, the pharaoh's mind was alert, anticipating challenges, managing relationships, and ensuring that all actions aligned with the divine order. The pressures of culture and religion were inescapable, entwined with every aspect of life and governance. They dictated the pharaoh's schedule, his interactions, his decisions, and even his private thoughts. Personal desires, emotions, and preferences were subjugated to the demands of tradition and divine expectation. And so, if you were transported from the modern world into the life of a Nubian pharaoh, you would quickly realize the impossibility of surviving even a day. The weight of divine expectation, the scrutiny of priests and subjects, the constant performance of ritual, and the intertwining of spiritual and political responsibility would overwhelm any untrained mind. The crown, while majestic, is a heavy burden that demands perfection, endurance, and wisdom beyond ordinary human limits. The life of a Nubian pharaoh was an endless cycle of ritual, observation, decision, making, and expectation. To rule was to navigate a complex tapestry of culture, religion, and politics while maintaining the illusion and reality of divine favor. It was a life that demanded not only skill and courage, but also insight, discipline, and an unshakable commitment to tradition. There was no respite, no escape, and no room for weakness. Every sunrise brought new ceremonies, every conversation demanded careful articulation, and every action carried both spiritual and temporal consequences. And yet, through this crucible of culture and religion, Nubian pharaohs did not merely survive. They thrived. They built monuments, led armies, governed complex societies, and left legacies that endure to this day. Their ability to embody divinity, navigate ritual, and maintain authority in the face of constant scrutiny is a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and discipline. To step into the life of a Nubian pharaoh is to step into a world in which culture, religion, and duty are inseparable, where every action has profound meaning, and where failure is never tolerated. Survival required mastery of ceremony, knowledge of sacred traditions, skill in diplomacy, and the ability to maintain unwavering composure under pressure. It is a life that few could endure, a life in which the pharaoh was constantly tested, and a life that demands both reverence and awe from anyone who imagines it. And that is the third truth of the Nubian pharaoh's world. To rule is to embody divinity, to honor tradition, and to navigate the immense pressures of culture and religion without faltering every single day. The life of a Nubian pharaoh was a balancing act unlike any modern conception of leadership. Beyond the weight of physical endurance and the relentless demands of religious ritual, the pharaoh was tasked with the delicate and dangerous business of governing a kingdom. This was not merely a matter of issuing commands or delegating responsibility. It was a life-consuming endeavor requiring knowledge, foresight, diplomacy, and an ability to anticipate the unpredictable turns of fate. Imagine beginning a day not in comfort, but with the heavy burden of responsibility pressing on your shoulders. The Nile runs through your kingdom, lifeblood of your people, source of fertility, commerce, and sustenance. Yet it is also unpredictable, capricious, and potentially destructive. A flood that comes too early or too late can ruin crops, leaving the population hungry and vulnerable to disease. A drought can spark rebellion as desperate people turn against authority. As pharaoh, you must monitor these patterns, consult with priests and advisors, and make decisions that will influence not just immediate survival, but the prosperity of generations. You are expected to understand the land as intimately as you understand your own body, knowing where to cultivate, where to fortify, and where to trade. Each province under your control has its own local leaders, customs, and loyalties. Some are loyal to you, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. You must manage these relationships delicately, distributing favors and punishments in a way that maintains unity without showing weakness. A miscalculated decree in one province can cascade into rebellion in another. Diplomacy is not optional, it is survival. Envoys and ambassadors arrive regularly from neighboring kingdoms, each with their own agendas, subtle threats, and opportunities for alliance. A pharaoh must negotiate treaties, secure trade, and manage threats without revealing vulnerability. To misinterpret a gesture, a phrase, or an intention can have catastrophic consequences. Economic management is a constant and intricate challenge. Trade along the Nile and with neighboring regions brings wealth but also creates dependencies. Resources must be allocated carefully: grain to feed the population, gold to reward loyalty, labor to build temples and monuments, and soldiers to defend the kingdom. Corruption, embezzlement, or mismanagement among officials can weaken the state, yet disciplining or replacing them risks political backlash. Every decision must be precise, strategic, and informed. And while the pharaoh deals with politics and economics, there is also the ever-present risk of rebellion. Discontent among the people, the nobility, or the military can flare at any moment. One province may grow restless due to heavy taxation. A general may feel slighted and consider mutiny. A priest may perceive disrespect and mobilize followers against you. Each potential crisis must be anticipated, mitigated, and controlled before it escalates. In this way, the life of a Nubian pharaoh is defined by constant vigilance. You are never truly at rest, because threats exist both externally in neighboring kingdoms and internally within your own palace. Each decision has immediate consequences, and mistakes can reverberate for years, even decades. Consider the administrative machinery required to manage such a kingdom. Scribes and advisors track tax collection, trade, population, military readiness, and agricultural output. Reports flood in daily, each containing information that could shape the survival of the state. You must read, interpret, and act upon these reports with a combination of intuition and learned knowledge. Errors in judgment can lead to famine, economic collapse, or political instability. Even something as seemingly mundane as allocating grain requires careful calculation. The amount of seed set aside for planting, the amount stored for future famine, the amount distributed to nobles, and the amount sold for trade all carry long-term consequences. Mismanagement can spark starvation or unrest. And yet, economic responsibility is inseparable from military and religious duties. Grain must be stored to feed armies, to sustain workers building monuments, and to satisfy the priesthood. Your management of resources is a direct reflection of your competence and divine favor. The kingdom is a living organism, and the pharaoh is its beating heart. Every heartbeat, every decision, sustains or destabilizes it. Diplomacy further complicates governance. Neighboring kingdoms may seek alliances or attempt deception. Rival Nubian factions may vie for control. Foreign merchants may bring wealth but also foreign influence. The pharaoh must navigate these relationships with subtlety and intelligence. A misread signal can be interpreted as weakness, provoking attack or manipulation. Every conversation, every gift, every tribute must be carefully considered, and while external diplomacy is vital, internal politics are equally, if not more, dangerous. Nobles and advisors have ambitions, jealousies, and personal agendas. One may seek to discredit you in the eyes of the people. Another may manipulate religious interpretation to challenge your authority. Every smile, every gesture, every promise must be weighed for its political and social impact. The pharaoh must maintain control through a delicate balance of fear, respect, and favor. The human cost of these responsibilities is immense. Sleep is interrupted by reports of unrest, famine, or military action. Meals are taken while consulting maps, tax records, or intelligence reports. Leisure is almost non-existent, replaced by meetings, ceremonial duties, and constant oversight. The life of the pharaoh is a life of perpetual engagement, in which even the smallest lapse can threaten the stability of the kingdom, and yet the rewards for mastery are immense. A skilled pharaoh secures prosperity, loyalty, and reverence. Monuments rise in your honor, trade flourishes, and the people celebrate festivals that link your reign to divine favor. Your name is remembered not only for your power, but for your competence, wisdom, and ability to navigate the endless challenges of governance. But imagine the mental strain. Every day brings decisions that affect thousands of lives. You must weigh short-term needs against long-term stability. You must consider the desires of the nobility, the priesthood, the army, and the common people simultaneously. A single error in judgment can spark famine, rebellion, or military defeat. You cannot abdicate responsibility because the state rests entirely upon your shoulders, and there are no second chances. Unlike modern leaders who can rely on bureaucracies or fail safely, a Nubian pharaoh must act decisively, accurately, and ethically in every decision. To hesitate is to invite disaster, and even as you manage these enormous responsibilities, you must maintain the illusion of divine favor. Public perception is everything. A pharaoh who appears indecisive, fatigued, or disconnected risks losing authority. The people must see you as capable, wise, and favored by the gods. Every decree, every appearance, every speech must reinforce this perception. To fail is to weaken the kingdom and potentially to invite rebellion. The life of governance extends to justice as well. The pharaoh is the ultimate arbiter of disputes, interpreting laws, and ensuring fairness. Corruption, crime, and social unrest must be addressed decisively, but justice is never simple. Local customs, religious mandates, and political pressures all influence what is considered fair. Balancing these factors requires not only intellect but diplomacy and foresight. The pharaoh's ability to govern effectively is a reflection of personal discipline, endurance, and insight. Every day, countless interactions require careful consideration. How to allocate resources, how to reward loyalty, how to punish disloyalty, how to negotiate with foreign powers, and how to maintain harmony within your own court. Failure in any of these domains can threaten your reign. Even minor oversights can cascade into larger crises, and yet The pharaoh must also maintain the prosperity and morale of the people. Festivals, harvest celebrations, and public ceremonies reinforce loyalty and cultural cohesion. You must preside over these events, ensuring that your people perceive abundance, fairness, and divine favor. A pharaoh who neglects this aspect risks alienating the population, which can destabilize even the strongest armies or most fortified cities. Managing trade is another constant concern. Nubia's wealth relied on trade with Egypt, neighboring African kingdoms, and distant lands. Goods, precious metals, and resources flowed along the Nile and across deserts. A pharaoh had to ensure that trade agreements were honored, that supply chains remained secure, and that merchants remained loyal. Failure in these economic matters could weaken the kingdom, reduce military readiness, and diminish public confidence. Military readiness, of course, is inseparable from governance. The pharaoh must ensure that armies are trained, equipped, and supplied. Borders must be defended, fortresses maintained, and troops motivated. Every economic decision affects the military. A shortage of food or pay could result in desertion. Poorly maintained infrastructure could weaken defenses. Mismanaged alliances could leave the kingdom vulnerable. And the stakes are high. Rebellion, invasion, famine, or civil unrest are never hypothetical. They are constant threats that demand vigilance, foresight, and rapid, decisive action. The pharaoh cannot ignore them even for a single day. To govern as a Nubian pharaoh is to live in a state of perpetual calculation, where every action, every word, and every decision carries consequences. You are simultaneously judge, administrator, diplomat, and commander. You must consider not only what is right, but what is practical, strategic, and aligned with the broader interests of your kingdom. And in the midst of this, the human element cannot be ignored. Advisors, generals, priests, and nobles all have their own ambitions, fears, and loyalties. To govern successfully, you must anticipate their actions, understand their motivations, and navigate their influence without alienating allies or empowering rivals. Every relationship is a test of perception, skill, and insight. And yet, despite these enormous pressures, Nubian pharaohs did govern successfully, leaving behind legacies that endured for centuries. They built prosperous cities, maintained powerful armies, and forged alliances that strengthened their empires. They managed complex economies, sustained cultural traditions, and ensured that the kingdom remained a center of power in Africa and beyond. To step into the role of a Nubian pharaoh is to understand the impossibility of modern comfort, the necessity of constant vigilance, and the extraordinary demands placed on every aspect of your life. Power was inseparable from responsibility, prosperity inseparable from skill, and survival inseparable from wisdom. One misstep could unravel years of careful governance, while a single inspired decision could elevate the kingdom to unprecedented heights. And that is the fourth truth of the Nubian pharaoh's life. Governance was a relentless, unending challenge, requiring mastery of economics, diplomacy, military oversight, and social cohesion, all while projecting the authority and divine favor that legitimized every action. You would not last a day, not because of incompetence, but because the demands of ruling a complex kingdom without error, without pause, and without faltering exceed the capacity of most humans. The pharaoh's life is a constant negotiation between human limitation and divine expectation, and only the extraordinary could endure it. To rule was not merely to survive, it was to thrive under conditions of perpetual pressure, to act decisively amidst chaos, and to maintain harmony across a kingdom that depended entirely upon your strength, insight, and endurance. The life of a Nubian pharaoh was not only defined by the physical rigor of leadership, the religious obligations that intertwined with every action, or the immense responsibilities of governance and economic management. it was also shaped by profound personal sacrifices that few modern humans could even begin to imagine. To live as a Nubian pharaoh was to surrender the very essence of personal freedom, privacy, and the autonomy that ordinary life affords. Every thought, every action, and every interaction was subject to scrutiny, interpretation, and judgment by a network of individuals whose loyalty could shift in an instant. Even in moments that might seem private, the pharaoh was never truly alone. Courtiers, advisors, priests, guards, and spies were ever present, watching, listening, and reporting. Meals were not taken in solitude. Rest was never entirely private. Conversation itself was a performance that could carry political consequences. In this environment, personal desires, emotions, and whims were not luxuries. They were liabilities. Imagine the simple acts of modern life: eating when hungry, speaking candidly with a friend, or taking a walk without observation. For a Nubian pharaoh, none of these were freely available. Even the act of sleeping was fraught with potential danger and expectation. Guards patrolled the royal quarters, advisors whispered in anticipation of a misstep, and family members observed with eyes trained to detect weakness. The bedchamber, which might be a place of refuge in another life, was transformed into a stage of power, surveillance, and ritual. You could not allow yourself to be vulnerable in any sense, because vulnerability could be interpreted as incompetence, divine disfavor, or weakness that rivals might exploit. And yet, the emotional and psychological demands were as significant as the practical restrictions. The pharaoh was expected to embody perfection in every moment, to demonstrate wisdom, courage, piety, and authority without pause. There was no allowance for human imperfection, no margin for error, and no reprieve from the constant pressure to be both mortal and divine. Every decision, from the allocation of grain to the management of military campaigns to the subtle diplomacy of foreign emissaries, carried weighty consequences. A single lapse could lead to rebellion, famine, or even death. The psychological burden of such constant accountability was immense. You could not step away from responsibility, you could not defer judgment, and you could not ignore the expectations of your people, your army, or the gods. And these pressures were compounded by the knowledge that history itself would judge your reign. Your actions, decisions, and even personal conduct were recorded in temple inscriptions, monuments, and accounts that would endure long after your death. Success would bring glory, reverence, and immortality in the eyes of your people, but failure could tarnish your name for centuries. The weight of this duality, immediate responsibility and enduring legacy, added another layer to the pharaoh's psychological strain. Socially, the pharaoh was isolated. Relationships were complicated by power dynamics, ritual obligations, and the constant presence of courtly observers. Trust was a rare and precious commodity, and even within the family, alliances and rivalries could shift unpredictably. Marriage and companionship were often tools of political strategy rather than personal fulfillment. Personal feelings could not outweigh political necessity. Emotional expression, if perceived as weakness, could be exploited. Mourning the loss of a loved one, expressing anger at a betrayal, or revealing fear in the face of danger were all actions with consequences. The pharaoh's life demanded that such emotions be internalized, disciplined, and managed with meticulous control. And while the mind labored under the weight of endless decisions, the body too was a site of constant sacrifice. The pharaoh was expected to maintain appearances of vitality and strength, even under exhaustion, illness, or injury. Ceremonial attire, adorned with gold and jewels, could be cumbersome and uncomfortable, yet removing them or failing to appear appropriately was unthinkable. The pharaoh's posture, gait, and gestures were all scrutinized for signs of fatigue, weakness, or lack of divine favor. To falter in appearance was to risk undermining authority. Sleep, when it was allowed, was often interrupted by urgent reports from governors, generals, or priests. You might awaken in the dead of night to news of rebellion in a distant province, flooding along the Nile, or an unexpected foreign threat. Each moment required immediate judgment, and there was no opportunity to defer responsibility or seek comfort. The cycle of exhaustion, vigilance, and decision-making was relentless, unending, and inescapable, and yet the psychological burden extended far beyond fatigue. The pharaoh was expected to reconcile the contradictions of divinity and mortality, power and vulnerability, authority and human emotion. You were godlike in the eyes of your people, yet entirely human. You bore the authority of kingship, yet were constrained by tradition, ritual, and expectation. You commanded armies, yet your own life was perpetually at risk from conspiracies, rebellion, and assassination. Living under such conditions required extraordinary mental fortitude, discipline, and awareness. To falter, even momentarily, could have catastrophic consequences. The isolation inherent in such a role was profound. While surrounded by people at all times, the pharaoh was fundamentally alone in experience. Advisors could guide, generals could advise, priests could interpret, but the ultimate responsibility for every action, every decision, and every consequence rested solely upon your shoulders. Even the most loyal confidant could not share the burden of judgment, and even the most devoted soldier could not experience the anxiety of leadership. This solitude, imposed by both circumstance and expectation, created a profound psychological strain that was invisible to the world but acutely felt by the ruler. And yet, despite these immense pressures, the pharaoh was expected to perform with grace, dignity, and composure. Emotional displays that might be natural for ordinary people, fear, anger, despair, were unacceptable. The king's countenance had to convey calm, strength, and divine favor at all times. The ability to mask human emotion while experiencing it fully was essential. This required not only psychological resilience, but a form of mental compartmentalization that is difficult to imagine for modern humans. The pharaoh's responsibilities extended beyond personal and political realms to encompass spiritual and cultural expectations. You were a living symbol of cosmic order, and your conduct was interpreted as reflecting the favor of the gods. Mismanagement of resources, poor judgment in diplomacy, or failure to perform ritual correctly could be seen as evidence of divine displeasure. The weight of this interpretation added layers of anxiety and pressure to an already overwhelming set of duties. Even leisure, when permitted, was fraught with obligation. Hunting, music, poetry, and celebration were not purely for enjoyment. They were expected to demonstrate vitality, skill, cultural refinement, and divine favor. Any misstep could be interpreted as personal weakness or failure. Every action was a test of endurance, intelligence, and composure, and in moments of private reflection, the pharaoh had to wrestle with existential questions that few outside the royal court could comprehend. How could one maintain justice, mercy, and authority simultaneously? How could one satisfy the demands of the gods, the people, and the court? How could one ensure survival, legacy, and divine favor in a world fraught with unpredictability and danger? These questions were never theoretical. They were immediate, practical, and potentially life-threatening. The mental strain of constant vigilance, responsibility, and self-discipline was compounded by the knowledge that one's every success and failure would be recorded in stone, remembered for generations, and interpreted by priests, scholars, and future rulers. Even the way the pharaoh slept, ate, walked, and spoke could be memorialized and scrutinized long after death. This knowledge amplified the psychological burden, as the ruler's life was simultaneously immediate and eternal. Family life was equally complicated. Relationships were strategic, marriages arranged for alliance rather than love, and personal attachments could be sources of both strength and vulnerability. Children, siblings, and spouses could be manipulated by political rivals, and the emotional cost of managing these relationships while maintaining the image of a godlike ruler was immense. The pharaoh could never fully relax even among family, because the personal and political were always entwined, and in moments of illness, injury, or doubt, the pharaoh could not simply step away. The machinery of the state depended entirely on the ruler's presence and decision-making. Delegation was limited, as true authority resided in the king. Advisors could offer counsel, generals could act, priests could interpret, but the final responsibility was inescapable. Even a minor error in judgment could have cascading consequences. Imagine the psychological pressure of constant surveillance. Guards observed every movement, spies reported every interaction, and even seemingly innocuous conversations could carry weighty implications. The pharaoh had to maintain composure while remaining constantly aware of potential threats, real or imagined. Trust was a precious commodity, rarely freely given, and even among the closest confidants, suspicion had to be maintained. And yet, despite this relentless pressure, pharaohs endured, often thriving under circumstances that would break ordinary humans. Their ability to navigate psychological strain, maintain composure, and perform flawlessly under scrutiny was extraordinary. They were trained from youth to master not only physical skill, ritual precision, and political strategy, but also mental and emotional discipline. The pharaoh's life demonstrates the remarkable capacity of humans to adapt, endure, and even excel under conditions of extreme expectation. Personal sacrifice extended to freedom itself. You could not wander freely, speak freely, or act without consideration of consequence. Even thoughts, when expressed in conversation, were subject to interpretation. Your body, mind, and spirit were instruments of rule, always on display, always subject to the scrutiny of the court, the people, and the gods. Leisure, intimacy, and personal comfort were subordinate to duty. Even the simplest pleasures, eating, sleeping, or walking, were bounded by ritual and observation, and while the world outside the palace might have seemed vibrant and alive, the pharaoh's life within it was a world of constant responsibility and subtle surveillance. Every action had purpose, every gesture was symbolic, and every decision carried weight. And so, if you were transported from modern life into the world of a Nubian pharaoh, you would quickly realize the impossibility of ordinary human existence in such a role. The demands of leadership, the expectations of divinity, the pressures of governance, and the scrutiny of advisors, priests, and family create a life in which personal autonomy is nearly non-existent. The mental and emotional strain is unrelenting, and survival requires extraordinary discipline, intelligence, and resilience. And that is the fifth truth of life as a Nubian pharaoh. To rule is to sacrifice personal freedom, privacy, and emotional comfort while carrying the weight of constant judgment, expectation, and psychological pressure. You would not last a day, not because of lack of ability, but because the life of a pharaoh demands mastery of the self in a way that modern humans are rarely required to practice. To endure is to transcend ordinary limitations of body, mind, and spirit, living every day under the gaze of mortals and gods alike. The pharaoh's existence is both magnificent and cruel, glorious and exhausting, and only the extraordinary can navigate its demands without faltering. To fully understand why you wouldn't last a day as a Nubian pharaoh, you must first grasp that the role was a fusion of every conceivable human demand: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual, all compressed into a single, unrelenting existence. Unlike rulers in some civilizations who could delegate most burdens to advisors or generals, Nubian pharaohs bore the weight of their entire kingdom upon their shoulders. Imagine a day that begins before dawn, with the heat of the Nubian sun not yet risen, but already pressing down in anticipation. Even in the darkness, you are awake, because responsibility begins before the world stirs. The first tasks are those of ritual purification. You cleanse yourself in sacred waters, anoint your body with oils, and adorn yourself with ceremonial attire that is both symbolic and restrictive. These rituals, while meant to honor the gods, are also tests of focus, endurance, and precision. A misstep could be interpreted as divine disfavor, and divine disfavor in the eyes of your people is as dangerous as any sword on the battlefield. No other human role demands such a constant intertwining of personal discipline with cosmic consequence. As you step from the palace chambers, the kingdom comes alive around you. Advisors, generals, priests, and courtiers watch, each with their own ambitions, fears, and interpretations of your every action. Their eyes measure competence, loyalty, and divine favor. Each word you speak, each gesture you make, must convey strength, wisdom, and unshakable authority. Hesitation, fatigue, or even a miscalculated smile could signal weakness, providing openings for rebellion, betrayal, or political intrigue. The pharaoh's life is a continuous performance in which reality and perception are inseparable. Physical demands are relentless. You must not only sit upon the throne and command, but also embody the strength of a warrior. Nubian pharaohs led armies personally, traversed deserts, rivers, and marshlands, and participated in hunts that doubled as military training. Imagine riding for days along the Nile, your body aching, your muscles strained, your skin scorched by the sun, all while making strategic decisions that could mean life or death for hundreds, even thousands, of people. You carry weapons, direct troop movements, and maintain vigilance against both natural hazards and human threats. A misstep here is literal death, not metaphorical, and yet the expectation is that you project composure, authority, and divine favor. Mental and emotional pressures are no less severe. The pharaoh is constantly required to make decisions with incomplete information, balancing immediate needs against long-term consequences. Famine in one region must be addressed without undermining military campaigns elsewhere. Rebellions must be quelled while maintaining the appearance of justice and fairness. Diplomacy must be conducted with skill, patience, and subtlety, because foreign rulers are constantly assessing your strength, intent, and vulnerability. Even a minor error can lead to invasion, subterfuge, or the loss of critical alliances. The mind must operate at an extraordinary level of focus and adaptability, because the consequences of failure are immediate, pervasive, and often irreversible. Spiritual obligations compound these pressures. As pharaoh, you are the living embodiment of divine favor, the intermediary between the gods and your people. Every action down to the placement of your hands, the pronunciation of words, and the selection of ceremonial garments carries spiritual weight. Failure in ritual could be seen as evidence of disfavor, inviting unrest or disaster. You are expected to internalize these expectations, embodying perfection in every aspect of your existence. There is no room for error, no opportunity for negligence. These spiritual obligations are intertwined with political authority. The people follow you not merely because of fear or respect, but because they believe in your divine connection. To falter in ritual is to weaken your rule and jeopardize the stability of the kingdom. The administrative and economic responsibilities are equally daunting. Every day requires decisions on taxation, trade, resource allocation, military readiness, and diplomacy. Provinces must be managed with careful attention to loyalty and productivity. Trade agreements must be negotiated and enforced. Soldiers must be trained, fed, and motivated.